The night air over Alexandria was thick with incense and tension. From the harbour, you could see the palace lit like a temple, torches lining the marble colonnades, shadows flickering behind silk-draped windows. But the real story began when the bronze doors of the pharaoh's private chamber slammed shut. Inside, Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, sat alone for a moment, her crown tilted slightly forward, her hand wrapped around a golden scepter. Then she gave the signal. One by one, her most trusted courtiers entered, advisors, guards, priests, ambassadors from foreign lands. Some came willingly, others with hesitation in their eyes. Roman propaganda would later call her the whore queen of the Nile, claiming she demanded loyalty in bed before she demanded it in court. Egyptian scribes stayed silent, perhaps out of reverence or fear. But that night, the rumors had teeth. Was this lust, or was it the most dangerous political strategy in history? Some historians say this moment never happened, that it's a fantasy Rome invented to destroy her name. Unpopular opinion. Maybe Rome didn't have to invent anything. Maybe they only reported what everyone already knew. For more stories like this video and subscribe to our channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we learn about history together from all around the world. When Cleopatra first sat on Egypt's throne in 51 BC, she was just 18 years old, a girl in a palace of old men. Her father, Ptolemy XII, had left her a crumbling kingdom drowning in debt to Rome. Egypt was rich in grain, gold, and luxury, but poor in political stability. She was supposed to co-rule with her 10-year-old brother, and later to marry him, as was the Ptolemaic custom. But marriage didn't mean love. In Egypt's royal court, marriage was a contract of control. And in a court full of rival families, jealous generals, and foreign spies, Cleopatra knew that playing by the rules was a death sentence. The Ptolemaic dynasty had long understood that sex and politics were intertwined. Their own royal family tree was a tangle of incest, intrigue, and betrayal. But Cleopatra was about to take that understanding further than anyone before her. In her first months, she faced a coup attempt from palace officials who believed she was too young and too female to rule. She was pushed to the margins, forced into exile while her brother's regents ruled in his name. But exile gave her time to think and to plan. She studied the way Rome operated, how alliances were made over wine and women. She saw that Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, was as susceptible to charm as he was to strategy. When she smuggled herself back into Alexandria rolled inside a carpet, she wasn't just reclaiming her throne, she was making her first public statement. I will use every weapon at my disposal, and none of you will see it coming. Her relationship with Caesar is well documented. Ancient historians claim she used her beauty and wit to win his favor, securing his military support to crush her brother's forces. With Caesar's legions behind her, she regained the throne. But the whispers in Alexandria began. If she could seduce the ruler of Rome, what might she demand from her own court? Was Cleopatra's bed a political council chamber? Unpopular opinion. The greatest weapon of the ancient world was not the sword, but the promise of a night that could change your destiny. Publicly, she styled herself as the living goddess Isis, a divine ruler, untouchable and pure. Privately, according to hostile Roman sources, she blurred the lines between intimacy and allegiance. The higher your posing. In her court, the closer you were invited to her private chambers. Her critics said she corrupted the nobility. Her defenders said she was merely controlling the snakes before they could be. If you wanted her favor, you had to give her more than loyalty, and if you thought you could serve Egypt while serving another master, you would not serve at all. If you were in Cleopatra's court, would you have given her what she demanded, or risked the price of refusal? Cleopatra's throne room dazzled foreign envoys with gold, marble, and incense, but her true seat of power lay deeper inside the palace, past the guarded halls and silk curtains. Roman chroniclers, with venom in their ink, described her golden chamber, a private court reserved for her most trusted men. To the Romans, it was a den of depravity. To the Egyptians who served there, it was the center of power. Some were military commanders, others were high priests, scribes, and foreign diplomats. All were hand-picked, all owed their loyalty directly to her, and the rumors claimed that loyalty was sealed not with oaths, but with nights in her bed. Was it true? Roman propaganda was notorious for smearing enemies, especially women who challenged their power. But here's the part history doesn't like to admit. The accusations started inside Egypt, long before the Romans arrived. Unpopular opinion. When the same rumor comes from both your friends and enemies, maybe it's not entirely a lie. Cleopatra understood something most rulers ignored, that intimacy could be political currency. A general might hesitate to betray his queen if she knew the shape of his scars. A priest might guard her secrets more fiercely if he'd shared his own in the dark. Some men basked in this privilege, boasting quietly of being favored. Others felt trapped, afraid that refusal would mean exile, or worse. And the truth? In her palace, you didn't always get to choose. Was this seduction or state-sanctioned coercion? Foreign ambassadors from Greece and Nubia told tales of lavish feasts where the wine flowed until mined, airs blurred, and where the queen's gaze alone could summon a man to follow her from the banquet hall. Some never returned to the party. Was it desire? Was it strategy? Or was it both, tangled so tightly no one could separate them? In the ancient Egyptian mind, sexuality wasn't shameful. It was divine. The pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus and sometimes even the fertility god Min. Intimacy was not merely pleasure, it was sacred power, believed to strengthen the ruler's connection to the gods. Cleopatra didn't just inherit this belief, she weaponized it. Every man in that inner circle knew two things. She could lift you to the highest place in Egypt with a single touch. She could destroy you just as easily if she felt your loyalty waver. Unpopular opinion: the most feared executioner in Cleopatra's Egypt was not the headsman, it was her rejection. Those outside the court whispered of the circle of the queen, men who dined in private, who spoke in half sentences as if guarding invisible chains. Some claimed she rewarded them with estates and wealth beyond measure. Others swore they saw one disappear overnight, his name never spoken again. The seduction court wasn't about love, it was about control. It was about knowing who would follow her into the fire and who would burn before they got the chance. If absolute power means absolute access to anyone you choose, is that leadership or tyranny? And yet, for all the scandal, one truth remained. No man who entered that golden chamber emerged with less power than he had before, at least not immediately. Cleopatra was no fool. She fed her favorites with just enough privilege to keep them loyal, and just enough fear to keep them quiet. Still, power this intoxicating comes with a cost, and soon, the very intimacy that made her untouchable would also make her vulnerable. Because in Cleopatra's Egypt, a single night in the queen's bed could be the making of a man, or his death sentence. Cleopatra's enemies feared her throne, but they feared her bed even more. In the politics of ancient Egypt, a banquet could end in an alliance or a burial, and in Cleopatra's reign, the most decisive negotiations were whispered in candlelit chambers, with silk sheets tangled like the Nile at flood. Roman historians, often more storytellers than truth-tellers, claimed that she seduced every man who could pose a threat or serve a purpose. Their logic was simple: you cannot conspire against a queen if you are tangled in her arms. But was it just seduction, or was it something darker? In Cleopatra's palace, the price of saying no might have been higher than the price of saying yes. Those closest to her said she never made intimacy casual. It was a transaction, a binding pact. You entered as a man of ambition, you left with a gift, a warning, or both. Some men received lands, others received orders, a few received nothing but a smile, which in Cleopatra's court was often the coldest gift of all. The high priests whispered of an even more dangerous layer, the ancient belief that the pharaoh's divine energy could be strengthened by taking the vitality of others. In the temple myths, the goddess Isis renewed her power through ritual union. Cleopatra, who styled herself as Isis incarnate, might have believed, or at least pretended to believe, the same. Was this religion or manipulation dressed as religion? What the Roman Senate didn't understand, or pretended not to, was that Cleopatra's private life wasn't a distraction from her rule. It was her rule. Every lover was a political hostage wrapped in pleasure. Every intimate moment was a test of loyalty under the most intoxicating pressure. Foreign diplomats described her as intoxicating in ways that had nothing to do with beauty alone. They wrote of her voice, how it could shift from velvet to steel in a heartbeat, and of the way she remembered the smallest details about Isis. Each man in her orbit, weaving their ambitions into her plans like threads in royal linen. Some claimed she lured her political enemies into affairs only to ruin them. A disgraced general would find his allies turning cold, his name missing from temple records, his property absorbed by the crown. Others said these stories were lies, spread by men who could not bear to admit they had been outplayed by a woman. If a male pharaoh had done the same, history would call it diplomacy, but a woman, they called it sin. In at least 2 known cases, men in her circle died suddenly after falling out of favor. The official causes were illness. The whispers said poison. One tale told of a man summoned to her chambers for reconciliation, only to be found lifeless before dawn, his lips stained with wine. The danger of her bedchamber wasn't just what happened inside, it was what happened after. Men left more entangled than when they entered, carrying orders they couldn't refuse, secrets they couldn't share, and desires that bound them to her even when it was suicidal. If you could secure your fortune in a single night, knowing it might also sign your death warrant, would you take that risk? But no weapon, no matter how potent, can be used forever without consequence. For Cleopatra, the danger wasn't just that her lovers might betray her, it was that some might decide they no longer wanted to leave her chamber alive. And when intimacy became rebellion, the disappearances began. In Cleopatra's Egypt, betrayal didn't always end on the battlefield. Sometimes it ended in silence. The whispers began quietly. A missing guard captain here, a vanished priest there. Always men who had once been close to the queen, men who had eaten at her table, laughed at her side, or lain in her bed. The official records listed no executions, no public trials. But in the necropolis outside Alexandria, archaeologists have found unmarked graves from her reign, hurried burials stripped of status, their names erased from stone. In ancient Egypt, to erase a name was worse than death. It was annihilation from memory in the afterlife. For a pharaoh who called herself a goddess, ordering such an erasure was a declaration that the gods themselves had turned their backs on you. History doesn't forget people by accident. Someone always swings the chisel. Some claim these disappearances were the result of court intrigue, power struggles among the Ptolemaic elite. Others suggested something far more personal, that these men had broken a bond that was as intimate as it was political. And in Cleopatra's Egypt, breaking either could be fatal. A story circulated in hushed tones. A young nobleman, once a favored courtier, began speaking too freely about the queen's private gatherings. Days later, his estate was seized, his servants scattered, and his body was found floating in the Nile, his face unrecognizable. Was this justice, or was it fear disguised as law? If the rumors of the Golden Chamber were false, why did so many who entered it end up dead or forgotten? In a city that thrived on gossip, the disappearances had the opposite effect. People stopped speaking. Servants lowered their voices when her name came up. Generals tightened their words like soldiers on parade. And those who remained in her favor learned a crucial lesson. Proximity to power is as dangerous as defying it. Foreign envoys noticed the pattern. Some withdrew their delegations early, fearing that an extended stay might place them in the queen's web. Others, more ambitious or reckless, saw the danger as proof of her power and sought her attention all the more. Fear is the truest form of loyalty. It doesn't waver when love fades. The strangest evidence came not from Roman propaganda, but from Egypt itself. In certain temple records, the names of high officials vanish mid-reign, replaced by hastily appointed successors. These erasures align suspiciously with moments of political crisis, suggesting Cleopatra was cleansing her court not just of traitors, but of anyone who might become one. And yet, despite the shadows, her rule held firm. Her enemies abroad called her immoral. Her people at home saw her as unshakable. For a pharaoh facing the full weight of Roman expansion, perhaps the only way to survive was to make betrayal unthinkable, even if that meant making survival itself a privilege. Is erasing your enemies from history the ultimate act of power, or the ultimate sign of insecurity? But fear has its limits. It can keep a court silent, until it can't. And Cleopatra's greatest threat would not come from Rome, nor from the streets of Alexandria, but from a place far more dangerous, her own inner circle. Because in the queen's palace, betrayal didn't knock on the door, it slipped into bed beside you. Beyond the marble columns of her palace, Cleopatra walked a different Egypt, one where the streets were narrow, the markets loud, and every ear was hungry for a story. To the common people, she was both a goddess and a ghost. Few ever saw her up close, but everyone claimed to know something about her. In the shadowy corners of Alexandria's wine shops, dock workers spoke of her beauty as if it were a curse. Fishermen swore she could sink a man with nothing more than a glance. And always, the same word clung to her name like incense smoke: danger. Some worshipped her as Isis reborn, a living divine force destined to lead Egypt against Rome. They hung her likeness in their homes, whispered prayers to her image, and believed every rumor of her supernatural charm. Others, more cynical, saw her as a seductress who traded Egypt's honor for her own survival, using Rome's most powerful men as stepping stones. Unpopular opinion: the line between savior and traitor is often drawn by the winners of history. Ironically, the more scandal swirled around her, the more powerful she seemed. In the eyes of the people, only someone truly untouchable could provoke so many whispers and still hold the throne. Every rumor of her private life became proof of her control. If she could command the desires of generals and kings, surely she could command the fate of nations. The markets buzzed with contradictory tales. A spice merchant swore his cousin had been invited to a palace feast and returned laden with gold. A potter claimed his brother had served wine at one of her private banquets where the men drank from cups shaped like lotus flowers and the queen's laughter rang like temple bells. And then there were darker stories of guests who left the palace in covered litters, never seen again. When scandal makes you stronger, is it still a weakness? The temple priests were split. Some saw her reign as divine will, the gods placing her in power to protect Egypt. Others quietly erased her name from certain records, fearing that her image of sacred womanhood was becoming corrupted by rumors that would outlive her. But Cleopatra understood something the priests did not. Scandal is a double-edged sword, dangerous but impossible to ignore. By leaning into the image of the untouchable seductress, she kept her enemies guessing and her people watching. Unpopular opinion: power isn't just about what you control, it's about what people can't stop talking about. And the people did talk. They talked in the markets, in the taverns, in the shade of the great library's walls. They wondered whether she was Egypt's greatest protector or its most dangerous gamble. One dockworker summed it up best after too much wine. She is the Nile. She feeds us, she drowns us, but we cannot live without her. If a ruler's scandal makes the people more loyal, is it manipulation or just smart leadership? But loyalty built on fascination is fragile. It can keep a people enchanted until they see blood. And for Cleopatra, the blood would come from within her own walls, because the deadliest enemy a queen can face is not the one who attacks her city, but the one who shares her bed. In a court built on loyalty, betrayal is more than treason. It's intimacy turned into a weapon. Cleopatra had survived coups, Roman interference, and endless palace intrigues, but her greatest threat was not a foreign army or an ambitious general. It was a man who knew her secrets, because she had once let him in. His name is lost to history, or perhaps deliberately erased, but Roman accounts describe him as one of her most trusted favorites. A man who had dined with her, advised her in council, and, if whispers are to be believed, shared her bed. He had been rewarded with land, titles, and the kind of closeness that most men in Egypt would kill for. And perhaps that was the problem. The story splits here, depending on who tells it. Some say he turned against her out of revenge, humiliated by a sudden fall from favor. Others believe he was a Roman agent from the start, planted in her court to undermine her from within. A few insist his betrayal was born from love, a warped desire to free her from what he saw as corruption. Whatever his reason, one fact remains. On a night when the palace was quiet and the guards relaxed, Cleopatra's most trusted man moved against her. Unpopular opinion: the most dangerous person in your life is never your loudest enemy. It's the one who already knows where you sleep. Roman sources claim he tried to poison her, slipping the venom into her wine during a private supper. Egyptian whispers tell a darker version, that the betrayal came during intimacy itself, a dagger hidden until the moment her guard was truly down. And then there's the most unset, cling possibility of all, that Cleopatra killed him first. Some fragments of temple records hint at an unworthy one struck down by the queen's own order, his death disguised as an accident. The truth may never be known, but the timing is too perfect to ignore. Within days of the incident, key positions in her court were quietly reassigned. Certain names vanished from the rolls, and Cleopatra appeared in public draped in black, not in mourning but in defiance. Was this the story of a woman betrayed, or a ruler eliminating the last man who could bring her down? The betrayal marked a turning point. From that moment, Cleopatra's inner circle tightened to a chokehold. Access to her chambers became rarer. The Golden Court still existed, but it was smaller, quieter, and more dangerous than ever. Trust dies in a single night, and once it's gone, power becomes a lonely thing. But as the walls around her heart and her throne grew higher, the storm outside was closing in. Rome's grip on Egypt was tightening, and the legacy Cleopatra had fought to control was slipping from her hands. When you've built your rule on loyalty, what happens when you can no longer trust anyone? Because in the end, Cleopatra's greatest battle was not for her life, but for the memory of who she truly was. Cleopatra's death is one of the most famous in history, and one of the most contested. The Roman version is a neat ending, abandoned by her lover Mark Antony, facing humiliation in Octavian's victory parade. The Queen of Egypt chooses suicide. An asp, hidden in a basket of figs, delivers the fatal bite. It's a story that satisfies Rome's need for a tragic, theatrical finale. It's also the version that ensures they get the last word. Unpopular opinion: when your enemies write your ending, you can be sure it serves their agenda, not the truth. Some modern historians argue that Cleopatra may have been murdered, eliminated to make way for Rome's few, control of Egypt. Others suggest her death was staged, that she may have disappeared entirely under another identity, vanishing into the very shadows she had always commanded. What's undeniable is what happened next: a deliberate erasure. Statues destroyed, names scratched from temple walls, her court dismantled. Those who had been closest to her, those who might have told the true story, either disappeared or became Rome's mouthpieces. The Cleopatra most people think they know is a creation of propaganda, a seductress who conquered men with beauty alone. But the Cleopatra who actually lived, ruled one of the richest kingdoms in the world for over 2 decades, navigated alliances with the most dangerous empire on earth, and kept Egypt independent until her final breath. So why does history remember her bedroom more than her battlefield? The answer may be as simple as this: power is forgivable in men, but not in women, especially when they play the game better than their rivals. For every Roman general who took lovers as part of his political strategy, history calls him shrewd. For Cleopatra, the same strategy became the defining sin of her reign. Unpopular opinion: if Julius Caesar had slept with his entire court to secure his rule, we'd call it genius. Cleopatra does it, and they call it ruin. Even now, archaeologists search for her tomb. Some hope it will tell the final truth. Others know the truth is already gone, destroyed by those who feared her power even after death. And perhaps that's her final victory, because as long as we debate who she really was, as long as her story sparks scandal and fascination, Cleopatra never truly disappears. So, was she Egypt's most dangerous ruler, or its most misunderstood? Was her court a den of lust, or the sharpest political weapon of her age? And in the end, did she lose? Or did she make sure the last move was shown as hers? Tell me, if the rumors about Cleopatra were true, does that make her unfit to rule, or the smartest pharaoh Egypt ever had? And if they weren't true, why do you think history fought so hard to convince us they were